major challenges that confronts us and how we can deal with those. Then we'll take a look at the opportunities that are there, given those hindrances, given those limitations. What are the essential growth opportunities that we have, and we move forward, and then we'll have a conclusion. All right. So let's begin with the first graph, and from this graph, from this graph, you will see exactly what I'm talking about. Okay. This, in fact, shows the growth. This, in fact, shows the growth from 1980, that's the period 1980. So what I've done, I've broken them up into basically average growth for the 5-year periods. So that's 1980 to 1984. That's the first 5 years. And 5-year increments, all right, coming down to 2024. Okay? Now, we are using our real GDP growth in Dominica between 1980 and 2024. Now, why real GDP growth? Real GDP growth is considered to be the international standard by which we measure a country's development. Okay, so that is used in every country. There is a way it is done. We are going to go into its calculation, but we are going to be using these are numbers that I have obtained from the International Monetary Fund. These are numbers that are given by the country authorities to the IMF, and they have made a huge database that all of this information is kept in. And so that's what we are using, is real growth. In other words, when you have a country growing by X% a year, that's what we are talking about. Okay? So we are going to go back to the very first period there. And if you notice, that is 7%. Okay? So between 80 and 84, Dominica's economy grew by 7% real GDP. And let me just say, this is the kind of growth that you need to really, a country like ours, its size and so on, that's the kind of growth you really need to get the country out of poverty. For example, in the 1930s, 40s, China was a very poor, if you like, backward country. But between the 1980s and 1990s, we were able to get their growth rates. So for many years, China was growing by like 15-20% a year. And that is how they were able to move millions and millions of people out of poverty. So now that China is even trying, at least trying to rival the United States in terms of prosperity and so on. But it's because they're able to generate a significant amount of economic growth over that period that allowed them to achieve that. So we had, but for us, 77% would really do very well for us. Okay? So that's where we are, at 7% that we were in 1980-84. Then see what happened. We began to see a decline in 85, 89. Okay? So we moved from basically 7% growth to roughly basically 4%. Right? So that's a roughly 4% growth here. And then 1990, we moved down to as low as 2%. 2% growth. So within basically 10 years, we moved down 5 percentage points of GDP. And we have never really recovered from that since that period. Then between 1994, there was some upward movement back to around 3%, 1995, 99. And then we moved in that period there, 2000, so that period there, in 1995-1999 period, that was when the Labour Party was in government. So we basically maintained a rate of growth of about 2.5% during that 5-year period. And then we basically moved below 2% in 2000, when the Labour Party took over in 2000. We moved to be just slightly below 2%. Then in 2005-2009, it was pushed back up to 3%, but then from 2009, we began to see a very significant sign in economic activity in Dominica. So we moved from around 3% in 2005-2009 to roughly 1% in 2010, 14, and it kind of remained that way for. So we had basically, if you like, 10 years of really less than 1% growth.
What?
Okay, 10 consecutive years of less than 1% growth in Dominica. And we've seen a little uptick there, and some of that uptick we see to above 1% is just because of the growth, the high growth we saw after Hurricane Maria in 2017. Then things, usually we have a very big tip or drop, then the following years are much more elevated. So that is some of what we're seeing here. But you can see that we've moved from all the way from 7% in 1980 to this is 1%. So that accounts. So when you think of the issues that Dominica is facing, you can look at this graph. Remember this graph. That is where we are. And that forms the basis of a lot of the issues that we have in Dominica. Youth unemployment, high migration rates, or social problems that we have. We can trace it to this very significant decline in economic growth that we've seen. So in terms of setting the basis, in terms of understanding this, our challenge then is how do we get this uptick? How do we move this line from here to back here? So that becomes the real challenge for us at Dominica. Okay? So I'm going to leave this on the screen just a little while longer, take a very close look at this graph. And especially as people are just tuning in, I'm going to make sure they see this, because if you miss this graph, the rest of the presentation is not as coherent. Right? So that's a very important thing to understand in terms of where we are with the rates of the economic growth. Okay? So let's move on to the next slide. Alright. So take a look at our neighbors. And the way I've done it is to make it as uncomplicated as possible. So we have Grenada, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, and Dominica. And then we have two periods. So this lime green color is really the rate of growth between 1980 and 1999. So we look at 20 years between 1980 and 1999, and then we looked at the years from 2000 to 2024. So that is this thing there. All right, that's 2020. So you're comparing this with this, with this, with this between 2000 and 2024. So, and then you are comparing the lines, okay, between 1980 and 1999. So let's look at the lime green one first. Let's look at this first. So during that period, the country that performed the best between the period between 1980 and 1999 would be St. Lucia. So St. Lucia recorded growth of about 5% during that time. So that's an average growth. Then that's some years would be above 5%, some years below 5%, but on average, they had a 5% growth in St. Lucia. Dominica was first, but Grenada was basically second, with about 4.5% rate of growth during that 20-year period. So you see, St. Lucia is first, Grenada is second, and Dominica was at roughly 4%, number 3, and then St. Vincent was slightly behind us at around 3.8%. Okay? So that was for the 1980 to 1999. So Dominica was doing relatively well. But then something happened, because if you look at this, all of this growth has disappeared since 2000 for all the countries. So one could argue it's not just Dominica, but it's something something's happening to the other islands as well. Because here between 2000, you see now, Dominica now we moved from third place to basically last now since 2000. We have the highest Grenada. There's nothing to write about because they're now only at around just about about 2.4% on average. Okay? So Grenada about 2.4%, St. Vincent closely behind, just about 2.1%, St. Lucia 1.8%, and Dominica about 1.5%. Okay, so we have had, if you like, a very drastic shift in the economic fortunes of those islands, including Dominica. But Dominica is St. Lucia for me, one can has the most profound dip in growth because they moved from well over 5% to about 1.5%. Dominica moved from basically from 4% to 1.4%. Okay, so that is where we're operating now, and that's where the problem continues to be because most of the low growth we're seeing is in the more recent years. And that's why when we think of the challenge, how we correct it, then we have to look at what's happening during that period and how we can change that dynamic to allow us to be able to express and to register a much higher rate of economic growth. Okay.
Question now?
Yes, sure. We can take questions as we go along. Yes.
Okay. The point is very interesting. Between 2000 and 2024, significant downturn in the economy of the United Islands. You did not state what likely to be responsible for that, but would you say?
We're coming. I was just kind of laying out for it, and then I was going to the analysis.
Okay, but I just wanted to ask, as you think, does it have to do with any change in the banana industry?
Okay, we'll come to that discussion. Yes. So during that discussion, so I was trying to lay out the history and then we go into the factors that impact it. Yeah. All right. So we can move to the next slide. All right. So this slide now again. This is just, I'm sorry about the quality of this. Then it's just a matter of showing the different year periods. All right. So again, Dominica is in the lime green. Again, going back to 1980, Dominica is in the lime green. So again, I packed it in a 5-year period. And so we're comparing the 4 countries between 1980 and 1984. So in the first 5 years, if you notice, the lime green is a star there. Dominica is doing really well in 1980 compared to the other islands because we are well at 7% growth, and none of the other islands matched it between 1980 and 1984. So Dominica is doing very well here. That's Dominica right here. Grenada is next in line with just about almost 6%, or 5.8%. And then followed by the purple is St. Lucia and then St. Vincent. All right. So you see how that first 5 years. Now look at what's beginning to happen already there between 1985 and 1989. Dominica has moved from its first position already to the 4th position during that year. So the purple St. Lucia, that was St. Lucia's brightest moment there. You see that tower there. Over 11%, about 11% growth during that 5-year period for St. Lucia, followed by Grenada with about almost 6%, and then we have St. Vincent and then Dominica. So we begin to see that reversal. Then the other period, 1990 to 94 period here, again you begin to see now all the countries are beginning to contract, right? Because already this is significantly less than this year. So already the countries are beginning to contract here. And Dominica, again, let's keep your eyes on the line doing for Dominica. We moved from about 4.5% in that period to just over 2% in that period there. All right? And you can trace Dominica going forward 1995 to 1999. We're here. And then look at this. I want to take us there. We're kind of exchanging positions during that period. But I want to take us here, and you see, how Dominica begins to show up against Grenada. It is doing relatively well in that period. Grenada again is doing relatively well. Dominica is right there, and here, little slight improvement, but nothing much in the last 5 years. Okay, so that is how we compare with our neighbors. We can move forward now. So let's look at the economic challenges. And so when we begin to talk about this, we begin to talk about some of the reasons why we have had this huge decline in our economy. Part of the issue that we have for all of the islands as well is this dependence on a single industry. So for many, many years with Dominica, it was that dependence on agriculture, on the agriculture sector, and more particularly bananas, that drove our economic survival. For some of the other islands, it is tourism. But you'll notice that during that period in Dominica's history, the focus was on bananas. That was doing really well for us until when bananas started to go out, then the country fortunes began to go down as well. Another huge challenge that we saw during that time, I don't want to spend too much time on the debt issue, but debt has been another big problem for us. Because what happened, as the single industry started to decline, then governments found that they needed to borrow a lot more to meet their obligations. So income that they would normally get through taxation, they now have to borrow to maintain some level of spending. So over that period, we accumulated quite a high level of debt, in particular external debt, and sometimes borrowing directly from the domestic banking sector. So that has been a very serious challenge. The first one, of course, we have social challenges. That shift that you saw, if you look at the crime statistics, for example, in a country like St. Lucia, a lot of the issues are in St. Vincent. A lot of the issues started with that huge decline. And that's the reason why, for us, in Dominica, we need to be extremely careful. Because St. Vincent had, I believe, close to 80-something murders last year. Just to our south. St. Lucia had an ongoing issue with murders and so on. You can see it creeping in Dominica. Right? And we need to be careful, because if we're not careful, we'll go the same way as St. Lucia and St. Vincent as far as crime is concerned. I think to some extent they have done better than the other countries with regards to our control of crime, but it's something that can really impact us. And then there's the issue of climate change issue, and in particular for us, the hurricane. It's something that we face every year, and we've had it in 2015, in 2017, we had this major hurricane that always poses a huge problem. That always poses a huge problem for us. Okay. Exchange rate issue, that's a very important issue for us in Dominica, because what you'll notice that we have been since 1970s, Dominica's currency has been pegged fixed to the US dollar at 2.7 to the US dollar, and that has served us for a very long time. All right. Low savings rate, because we don't have a lot of income. You find that people don't save as much. And why is that important? Savings usually determine the level of investments. Because the more savings within the banking system, the more the banks have to give out for loans and so on. And you can have investment for businesses and all the rest of it. And high interest rates, that's one thing you notice in Dominica, where the interest rates have been extremely prohibitive. For small businesses, for example, it's very difficult to go and borrow at commercial rates to try to run a business. And that's why when you're thinking of how to tackle some of the issues you're having, if you want to improve on the idea of to have more businesses, to have more private sector activity, then you must think of how you can allow access to capital for businesses. Okay? So a responsible government, for example, must have some system. We tried with the aid bank, but the aid bank never quite fulfilled what it was intended to. The aid bank's role was not to give mortgages. Right? The aid bank's role was to help businesses in tourism, in agriculture, and so on, make it possible. But not necessarily to give loans for them to go overseas and study. That was never what the aid bank was able to do. The They were supposed to be able to provide very, very low interest rate loans to businesses to make capital available with that, because businesses really cannot survive if they are to be taking stuff from the all the time. All right, you can just script it out. Okay. All right, so that is that's the issue. You can wait off the. All right. Okay. Just a little glitch that showed up. You can get rid of it. Okay. Let's see if I get it. If I can. Let me get this out. I think it's possible that I'm going this company. Alright, let's see this. I think we're back, eh? We just have to go ahead. I'm not sure. It's not it. Alright, so let's look at the growth opportunities and the way forward. All right. So we have kind of looked at the major issues, the major problems: high debt levels, climate issues, dependency. I think the dependency one is a very important one. So in terms of thinking through some of the solutions, you have to think of how you can combat those challenges that we spoke about. So, for example, when we move from agriculture, more recently we have moved into the CBI program. Again, with CBI, it is just that. That is a major government revenue source and the country source. So, again, that dependence on one thing, and that has its own issues. So then, how can we move away from that dependency? How can we change, begin to get this uptick on the slide that we had at the beginning, back to positive growth? Then diversification must be considered. Okay, so we're talking about diversification in the context, and you'll hear later in the presentations from agriculture. We have to see how music and entertainment industries can help us in that regard, our renewable energies, our natural environment, how we can make use of all of the resources that we know are within this country to help us to improve on that diversification process. So that's diversification. Then debt, right? This issue of debt is very important. The government currently, for every dollar of income this country earns, it spends at least 32 cents on the repayment of debt. Yeah, so that is extremely high. For every dollar, 32 cents goes back to repay debt. And typically you repay the debt first, even before you get theirs. And the reason for that is if you don't repay that debt, then you don't have access to new borrowing. So if you want to keep the avenues of borrowing open, you have to keep paying the debt. So that's an obligation that you have every single month, because most amortizations are done monthly. So you have to repay those loans basically monthly. So already, if you're spending so much in debt repayment, then you have to think about how you can get that level of debt to reduce. For example, from 32 cents on the dollar, probably to like 10 cents or so. That will give you, so that extra 22 cents you can use in education in other areas. Okay? Now, a lot of discussion has gone into that issue of debt. 2 years ago, I did some work with the United Nations, the office in Trinidad. They were trying to see, because of our vulnerability in the Caribbean, I talked about the climate change issues and hurricanes. They were trying to see, can we make a link? Since all of the Caribbean countries are vulnerable to natural disasters and climate change. Climate change is a big issue. Can we access resources that are available for climate change, but apply those resources to our debt? So my assignment was to come up with some idea as to how that can be done. Okay, how can we get that debt reduction and the climate change? So the proposal that I put forward, and they're working on, hopefully it will come through. The proposal was you have a kind of a debt swap, called a debt swap. Okay, so and the way it will work is very simple. A country has to pay, let's say Dominica has to pay every year, they have to pay back $80 million in debt. Okay, they pay back $80 million to our creditors every year. Instead of paying back this $80 million every year, we strike a deal with our creditors. They allow us to use that money not to repay the debt, but to invest in climate change issues. So we use that money to build seawalls, to reduce our risk of landslides, to mitigate the impact of disasters, basically. Relocate villages and so on that are vulnerable, that kind of thing. So that money will go towards that. And it will be budgeted so that there is some control. Because governments are very funny. You give them a little chance to say you're going to use it for that purpose and then use it for other reasons. Yes. So it will have to be strictly controlled. And there will be constant reviews so that if the government is not doing it, then they will have to now pay the debts. Right? They will be removed from the program. So we have some kind of controls. So that was a proposal I was able to come up with after talking to the different countries in the region. And it's under consideration by everyone. What I was able to show is that if you can reduce those levels of debt, the amount of income that will be available now to the country, always going towards climate change mitigation measures, but these are like infrastructure projects, these are like capital projects that can really help boost the country's economic growth. So there is a real growth impact that will impact growth, but also it will help the country to build up the resilience against natural disasters. So that's the kind of thinking that we have to come forward with, because other countries that are poorer, and although Dominica is by income levels, Dominica is a relatively poor country, but it is not considered to be a poor country by world standards. We are considered to be a more or less like a middle income country by the definition used by the World Bank, which is the international definition. So countries like Haiti are considered to be a poor country. Guyana, interestingly enough, a few years ago was considered to be a poor country, and they actually benefited a lot from debt reduction programs that we did during the time I was in between the 1990s, 2000. We did a lot of debt reduction programs in countries around the world, and Guyana and Haiti were the two countries in the Caribbean that benefited from this, so that their debt levels went all the way down. They got significant debt forgiveness and so on. Okay? But because we are a middle-income country, we don't benefit. And interesting enough, Guyana is now swimming in oil. Guyana's growth rate last year was 43%, and they'll probably grow by 60% this year. Okay, because they now have the second highest reserves of oil in the world. All right, and that's why Banjul was getting so excited because all of this oil there, in the Essequibo, around the Essequibo area of Guyana. So these countries have to come up with our countries that are considered to be not poor countries. We cannot benefit. Not only are we not able to benefit from these huge debt reduction programs, we also cannot benefit from low interest rates. Okay, so for example, when Dominica goes to borrow, it usually borrows at basically at near commercial rates. Whereas a poor country, defined as a poor country, can borrow at very concessionary rates. You're talking about rates of less than 1%. Okay? So if you compare 1%, say, on $100 million and 5 or 6 or 7 or 8% on $100 million, you can see how it makes a huge difference. Right? Because you're talking about significant sums of money. And the interest rate applied to that kind of increased your debt loads. And that's one of the reasons why, from that 80 million I spoke about earlier, more than 3/4 of that is in interest payments, and the rest is just principal. So it takes quite a long time to reduce that debt burden. and over time, you find yourself just going deeper and deeper in debt as a country. Right? So that is critical for us. Structural and fiscal reforms, that's another area that is critical if we want to confront those challenges. So Dominica, as we think of how we can reverse that serious slide that we have, that serious decline that we have, how can we do it? Okay, and you have to basically restructure your economy, basically. So I'm thinking, for example, that you need to put a lot of resources into agriculture. That would be one of my major recommendations, a lot of resources into agriculture, but not so much agriculture that we export our raw products. I find it extremely, well, not laughable, but almost idiotic that we send our plantains to Antigua, and Antigua are the ones sending all the chips to Sweden and to Europe. I mean, is there a boat that comes to Antigua that cannot come to Dominica? Probably there is. Right? Probably there is something that prevents us in Dominica from exporting our plantains at probably $1 a pound, and Antigua now enjoys like $10 a pound.
And good planting, eh?
Yes, good planting there. All right, so I'll have to peek quickly at the screen there. Yeah, so it is the, right, so, yes, okay. So the two other critical areas there are the high level of foreign direct investment. There was a time when foreign direct investment was very much a part of it. So when, for example, Dominica did the Invest Dominica Authority, that was with the hope that businesses, you attract businesses, and as they come to Dominica, you offer them incentives, you give them tax holidays, you allow them to bring in their raw material duty-free and so on. You give them some space to operate so that they can then employ Dominicans and so on. But if you look at the FDI rates in Dominica lately, it's almost non-existent. We've not really been able to attract much foreign direct investment. And that's where our Dominican diaspora, when we talked about the diaspora last night, that's where I believe our Dominican diaspora can play a critical role. Okay, there are Dominicans with tremendous wealth out there, but probably by themselves might not want to do something, but if you combine those resources as Dominicans, you can come back and do something in the country. So we have to think of how can we, that would be foreign direct investment because they're coming in with foreign currency, either Canadian dollars, coming with pounds, coming in with US dollars, which is all good for us. Right? So how do we get more foreign direct investments into Dominica to confront what we see there? So that's an issue that we have to kind of roll our heads around. So if there are enterprising business persons about us, can you come up with a project, for example? A project, say that we are going to, we see every very basic example. I saw this one coming up the road. All those mangoes that go to waste every day in Dominica, every mango season. Can we come up with a project to dry this fruit? Not only mango, but probably to dry bananas and plantains and so on. Can we write up a nice project and then have this project as a Dominican, living in Dominica? You don't have the resources. Very little chance of you getting the money from the aid bank because they have not been, as I said, they have not really succeeded in living up to their mandate, because normally with that type of project, you'll be able to go to an aid bank to get resources. I know businesses in Dominica that have been struggling for years. I know, for example, I see Passage and Billy Adrian there. I know the struggles that he's been through, trying to get his chips up and running. A project that you think that would be receiving funding from an aid bank, because it's a great project. It's making use of breadfruit, of plantains, of yams, and so on. I think that any government would want to support that, to have a program for those types of businesses to support it, but that does not exist. Okay? So a responsible government should be invested in those types of businesses. Because a small business like that can employ, take 75, 10 people, but it can grow easily to 100, 200 persons employed in that industry. Right? So that is something that certainly can be done and should be done in terms of getting those ideas going and then see how we can sell it to the diaspora. That's where we need to get a partnership with the Dominican diaspora, where they can group themselves into and see themselves now not only as I said sending barrels. Yeah, it's great to send a barrel into Dominica, but I think what is better is if we can use those resources for investment purposes. Right? And that can be done if it is organized, if there's some direction that is given from the authorities here. And certainly a much higher level of investment spending is required, and there must be a conversation as well. That is something and a responsible government can be into. There must be a conversation with the commercial banking system. Right? You cannot have rates, for example, at 11, 14, 12%. When in the rest of the world you have interest rates at 2-3% that people can borrow from. Okay, so there must be some discussion that can be had with the commercial banking system to make it easier for people to source resources through that means. Right? So these are some of the ideas that we can look at, and of course the idea of exchange rates is another big issue. How do we get exchange rates sorted out? Is a big one for us, right? And that is something you must have heard in the past, some discussion about should we, for example, devalue the EC dollar. That's a conversation that we hear every now and then. Is our currency too highly valued? When you compare, for example, the Jamaican dollar is about 170 Jamaican dollars to one, and we are less than 2. Okay. Is a country like Dominica, should our exchange rates be a lot lower? Should we be offering 150 EC dollars to $1 US, for example? That's a discussion that we are over again, because it relates to competitiveness. Now that discussion is really good if it is done like a country like Dominica, if you're competitive, if you have industry, if you have exports, if you have a buoyant tourism sector, those discussions become relevant for countries like Dominica, like our country. But in our current context, it is not. So, that is something that once you begin to develop a country, you have to start asking yourself whether or not, and there are ways you can determine whether or not your exchange rate is where it should be. All right, there is work that can be done. All right, and let me just conclude there with a few more thoughts on that. What we see is that economies are usually slow to recover. So when there is a hurricane, for example, it takes a number of years for the country to get back to that level it was before the hurricane. We saw it in 1979. We saw it again for major hurricane in 2017. When it happens, natural disaster, it takes some time. We have to be honest, there is limited scope to diversify, but Dominica is in a very unique place, I believe, and we'll see as we go through the next 2 days. You will see the different opportunities in all of those sectors. Renewable energies, IT sectors. So we have some scope to think. We obviously need to strengthen our regional cooperation. By now, CARICOM should be more than just a political organization. There should be a lot more trade and industry and commerce between the islands. So that needs to be strengthened. And we need to improve our competitiveness, obviously. And the final point there. Yeah, that's the final point. All right. So let me just thank you for this. I hope I didn't take too much time. But it's important to kind of set the basis for this. Going forward, you will be hearing, we'll begin with agriculture. In the next few minutes, you'll be hearing from our first presenter, who is going to be presenting virtually on the agriculture sector. So we look at agriculture, tourism, and later in the afternoon we look at the health sector and so on. And then we go like this for the next few sessions. All right. So thank you for listening. And questions? I think we can do 5-minute questions if you have any questions on the presentation.
On what condition is the considers not to be poor? And you can vaccine?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It is a very one thing they kind of just draw a line. It's a very they take your gross domestic product, GDP, divided by your population, and they have a level where if you're above that level, then you're not considered to be a poor country.
Okay? So when you look at Dominica, we are really way above that level. They have a per capita, I believe, about 3,000, or 6,000, probably 6,000 US dollars. Yeah. Based on our GDP levels. So we are not considered to be a poor country. Yes.
I really enjoyed the presentation. It was a very informative presentation. I like the data that you gave. Very instructive. I noted that from 1980 to 1999, on average, you said the economic growth was 4%. But in 1989, it was 7%. Now you have given an indication of the major problems, right? I don't know about that. But what would you say is the most important factor that caused such a significant drop in economic performance? Now, we also say that from 2000 to where we are now, there was a growth of on average, I said average, because 1.3 and 1.4 by average of 2%. What would you say is the most significant thing that happened from 1989 that has affected the economic landscape, not only of Dominica, but of the rest of the OECD states?
Yeah, I think the main reason was the demise of the banana industry. I mean, banana was extremely dominant, not only in Dominica, but there was also cases in St. Lucia and St. Vincent as well. So bananas, or the demise of bananas, we began to lose our regime in the 1990s. In fact, everything ended more or less in 1992, 1993. So you saw by late 1980s going to the 1990s, we began to lose that level of production and so on. And you had a lot of pressure from the World Trade Organization on the United Kingdom. They no longer accepted our bananas under that preferential arrangement that we have with them. So for many years we were able to sell bananas at preferential rates. They waived any kind of duties to make our bananas relatively cheap in the UK. That was removed. And because of that, we had the demise of bananas, and then the whole question of the leaf spot, and then we had the Lancet and Toka, all that leading to this. And quite frankly, I'm not giving the governments a pass, because that is something that, as a government, you have to be aware of. That if you're dependent upon one industry to look at it, that it will go away, and you have to be planning around that eventual demise. And there was enough notice that was going to happen.
So for our solution, I remember that period, and I remember the EU government, so to speak, where the EU provided a lot of funding for diversification. And I also remember Mary Junior advocating for diversification. It was in 1989 we made $110 million from that. It was almost 64% of our economy. But what we failed to do was to diversify from bananas. And I think all the monies were there. I went to Guyana and also to Jamaica, and I saw them diversify. But it was not only going to affect banana, but to keep other agricultural products. So the failure was to diversify from banana.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, and that's a very good lesson. Even St. Kitts, I did some work on. St. Kitts had a similar issue because they were heavily dependent on sugar. And they received funds from the EU for diversification funds. And when I was there in 2012, 2013, that was some of the money that we used to tackle the debt issue. Because at that time, St. Kitts' problem was really debt. It was stifling the commercial banking system, huge levels of debt. So we were able to come up with some strategies for them to use those resources that they received from the EU to get out of this debt and to begin that process of diversification, invest more into retail, invest more into tourism. So you see, we are countries that use that money, those diversification funds wisely. They've come out on top. I did not want to put St. Kitts in that area because we'll start probably crying and you see how well St. Kitts has done in comparison to Dominica. But they have, their governance there has been very different. There's been a lot more transparent.
they've been able to do a lot more in terms of the resources that they have. So yeah, that failure to diversify has really cost us, and we've not really come out of it. And that's why in our planning we have to think of how we can use, how we can use our herbs, our, everything that we have in Dominica, our bay oil and so on, to be able to push us forward, to begin that talk about diversification.
Yeah, just quickly, I know one of the opportunities in that respect.
You highlighted a number of opportunities that will have helped in respect to helping in economic growth. One of the debt reduction, or I take it to mean debt management, but is there a difference or distinction between that and debt forgiveness? So that's the other question.
Yes, so debt forgiveness is where you basically tell the country, I'm come out of here, please keep it. Right? But very few countries are willing to do that. The program that the IMF did in the late 1990s and early 2000s, I think it was earlier, it was called the heavily indebted debt countries, hippie countries, yeah. And those countries, because they were considered poor, they were considered for debt forgiveness. So that was a debt forgiveness program. Dominica, because of our income levels, we don't qualify for debt forgiveness. So that's why I calculate it as debt reduction programs. So the idea of the debt swap that I talked about, where you can swap climate change measures for debt, these are really things that come with, because no country will just readily forgive. And there was a good reason for that. We refer to it in economics as moral hazard. If you know that you're going to spend, let's say a child, parent and a child. If your child knows that you will give them money to spend, and as soon as they finish spending, they come back to you and then there's a good chance they will keep spending. Right? So if you give a country blanket debt forgiveness, they will get the debt forgiveness and they will come back again to borrow and hope to get more debt forgiveness. So to discourage that type of public behavior, you have to have some kind of debt program.
I'm sure of that.
All right, we'll take two more questions if there is. Yes, ma'am.
What role do you think population plays in economic development?
Yes.
That's a very, very crucial point here. I was saying, what role do you think that population, particularly in relation to land mass, as you see Dominica is very thinly populated, and the other islands you mentioned are more highly populated than Dominica relative to their land mass. So does our low population create an impediment to moving forward?
I pause to answer this because straight up we know that low populations matter, right? That population size doesn't matter. But in the context of a country like Dominica, the question is, where is our ideal population? Is it at 100,000, at 150,000? There is a certain population size that allows you to have your own internal process going on, your internal dynamic, as we call it, where you can generate economic growth, you have enough people. So if you open a business, instead of having 100 customers, you will have 1,000 customers. That has its own dynamic, right, population size. But because of where we are, and because of our situation, because of the way we're situated in Dominica, we should think of our population, not just Dominica, not just Creole speakers, but French speakers as well. Because we can just as easy to reach Guadeloupe or Martinique from where we are. So in that sense, in planning or thinking through, you must consider those regional markets as access, as extending your population. So no longer are you thinking of a population of 70,000, but you're thinking of a population of 1 million plus from Martinique and Guadeloupe. So the answer is yes, population does matter, but for Dominica, there are certain things that you can do, and that's why I would urge businesses. If you're thinking of a business in Dominica, don't think of simply supplying the local market. Your business must have at the back of the mind that you're going to tackle the regional market. Okay? That has to be, because you immediately make yourself, the potential space becomes broader almost immediately. Right? So that is something, and we are blessed because our location is true, we cannot drive across, but we can use shipping, and that's where the shipping, and we'll see later, I think later today or tomorrow,
that when we're talking about shipping, we'll see the critical role that interconnectivity with the other islands, why that is important and how that is very important. All right, so let's take one more and then we'll, is there no more? Okay, yes.
Yes, I worked in the banana industry for 18 years. And the demise of the banana industry accounts for a certain drop, as you said, and that's correct. At one time, we were making about $150 million a year in bananas. But we blame diversification, lack of diversification, for not taking the market after the banana industry dropped. But remember, we had a lot of grapefruits. People used to walk on grapefruits. We had a lot of avocado. People walk on avocado. Mangoes. So basically, it's not so much diversification. It's a matter of organized agriculture. Yes. Organized agriculture. Our agriculture is not organized, and that's our failure, basically. I just wanted to
Yes, absolutely. Because within agriculture, we can make use of the others outside of the region. All right, so thank you very much. I know somebody had in mind the time, so I will hand back to Kenneth. I'm not sure if you take our presentation and we go to a break.
Okay, we have taken quite a bit of time already, so let's try to save up on some time. So we will have the online presentation by Dr. David Lloyd, and then we'll have Error. If those who are presenting here can shave off 5 minutes of our presentation, that will help. But that would be very good. So can we load up the presentation, or can we have it online?
Yes, we can.
But clearly, from the last gentleman's question, we've got to flip through and we'll discuss it as the day goes by. What are the real challenges? So we can see a number of things that we suffer from, but we also have to really think through what are the root causes. What is the real issue there? And sometimes it boils down to something like institutions, like governance, like management. The right people, square pegs and round holes and stuff like that. But we will get to some of those as well. Let's just get to some questions. Okay, so if you've got paper and pen, write down some of your thoughts, some of your questions, and not just questions, because you have experiences, right? You see for yourself, in a sense, you are the Dominica experts because you see what's going on. And you can say, boy, this is not happening well because of that. Yeah? Just like the gentleman asked the question. So that's what we want to think of. But we want to study and consider all the matters so that at the end of the day, we truly understand how we can move forward. So it's not just the experts who are trained in the various areas, but it's also your own experiences where you worked, what you do. The gentleman here is involved in tourism and in transportation. Everybody here. So we do have our experiences and we want to consider that. One of the mistakes we sometimes make as professionals is that we do not consider the opinions of people who actually work in the field. Or, a guy comes and tries to build a bridge and he's not aware, as an engineer, he's well trained. Obviously, he should do his research and over a period of time study the water levels and so on. But the people in the area may know, look, the river every 15 years can reach this high. So if the engineer doesn't realize that even if he has 1 year of data, and in that year it happened to be a good year, he never saw the river rise to that level. But if he doesn't ask people in the community, how does this river behave? He will design a bridge that maybe in 5 years will be washed away. So you have some of the experiences, some of the expertise, so we also want to hear from you. Just wait, I'm just talking while we wait on the person to make no criticism in the end. Or should we press error? Oh, is he ready? If it helps in the interest of time, we could switch around to error and then we could. Yeah, error was just there. You went to the washroom. Okay, error will be back in a while. So error was supposed to speak on the issue of marketing and shipping, and that's a very, very, very important area. I remember recently we had, maybe still going on, I haven't followed it the last month, but we had a World Bank project where they gave farmers tools. You all are familiar with that, right? Yes. And I'm like, okay, tools are good. If you give me a chainsaw, certainly take it and certainly use it. But at the end of the day, I want to know where I'm going to sell my produce, how I'm going to sell my produce. And even if I figure out where the market is, at the end of the day, I want to know how we will get the produce from Dominica to where we're going to sell it to. So this is what Aaron was suggesting, that in the interest of time, maybe you could present now, and we will have Dr. Lord come after. Is that okay with you? Yeah. All right, good. So, right, so Aaron Manuel, you may be familiar with him. He used to work in the banana industry. So Aaron will be speaking on the role, exploring marketing and shipping options for agriculture.
Good morning. As the presenter on agriculture, one of the presenters, I would like us to stand and observe 1 minute silence for one of our very outstanding farmers in Dominica, Mr. Corbin Vidal, who passed. And we just want to spend 1 minute silence in his memory. You may sit it, thank you. Exploring. Can anybody tell me where in Dominica this is? No. No. One prosper. Very briefly, agriculture marketing is a process which starts with, first of all, somebody making a decision to produce something that they know there is a need for. So you decide you want to go into agriculture. Sometimes we call it chalet choosing, when you plant a small garden so that you can feed your family. But on the commercial side of agriculture, you plant it because you figure out there's a need, there's a felt need for a product that you can produce to supply that person. And so it involves having a marketing structure, a system. And I heard somebody give a comment that there is no structure, organized structure to manage agriculture. And in the absence of that, what you have is scattershot agriculture. Scattershot is you get something now, but you cannot get it in the next 2 months to supply whatever market that you have, because it is not organized production that is planned, scheduled, and forecasted. And in the absence of that, you cannot have a consistent market to supply. You need the financial institutions. Dr. Thompson spoke about that. Agriculture is or should be approached as a business because it's a business. You spend, you put inputs, and you expect outputs with a profit, except if you're doing it as a hobby. And so you need the financial institutions that will recognize that you need investment to produce a crop for a market. And those financial institutions must be accommodative for that type of business. I remember I went to a bank when I wanted to expand on my farm, and they said, we don't give agricultural loans. My savings, everything was there, but they don't give agricultural loans. So the institutions must be tailor-made to recognize that agriculture is part of our economic activity. You have to also have the technical. I was reading some documents, and the botanical gardens that we see there was a research center, and every crop that was planted had to be planted in that botanical garden. I never knew that we actually grew rubber in Dominica, and it was sent to England, and the quality was extremely good. So you have to have the technical know-how, the people that know what are the fertilizer requirements for the crop, what are the pesticides or the pests that affect it, and what are the appropriate treatments and intervention for that crop. Also, you must have pre- and post-harvest knowledge to be successful in agricultural marketing. We don't set the standards, the market sets the standards. You must know what is required at the market end, and so you must ensure that you provide to the customer what he or she requires, because remember, they are the ones spending their money. So you need the pack house, you need the place where you can assemble the crop, you can grate it and sort, you can reject what you have to reject, and export what is exportable for that desired market. Next slide. So the marketing concept is to be preoccupied with the idea of satisfying the needs of a customer. You're not planting it for yourself. And so even if you like a crop a particular way, that doesn't mean the customer likes it that way. And the customer is the one who pays, and therefore you must tailor it to meet the customer needs. Marketing of agricultural crop calls for a major thinking in companies. Before, a product could be generic and all supermarkets could have it. Now you go in supermarkets and you see they have supermarket brands. And you see they have supermarket brands, in-store brands, they call it. And so these are the dynamics that we have to be aware of. I remember in the banana industry that the Tesco supermarket had its own pack type, Sainsbury had its own pack type, and therefore the technical people had to let the farmers know what is the requirement for that specific supermarket. And we too, for us to be involved in commercial agriculture, we must understand that in the market distribution chain, there are distributors that you can sell to, but there are also supermarkets that you can sell directly to. And they will tell you what their requirements are, and you will have to supply that to them so that you can continue to have business. Because remember, you're not the only one producing. Whatever it is, we are not the only ones producing it. And so if we cannot meet the requirements, they have an option to go to another supplier. This is a graph for us to understand what has been happening to agriculture. This is not my data. The data came from the statistics department. Some people ask me how reliable the information is. That is not my purview to judge, but this is what was given to me. The point I want to make is bananas, which was once the champion, brought in $107 million in 1988. And when $107 million in 1988 came in, it was also the reunion year. And all Dominicans can remember 1988 was just a good time in Dominica. Because that banana dollar filtered down. And when Fridays come, you see pickups going up with the mattresses and the refrigerators, and because that money was circulated. And so it impacted, most importantly, the rural community. And so when we see the figures, like for example in 2011 we were still making $10 million out of bananas. Post-Hurricane Maria, it is just 988,000, just about $1 million. Planting the next crop, I want us to look at. When Dr. Lloyd and I did some consultants in 2016, we had already recognized, based on our work on the ground, that planting was about to overtake bananas. Because we saw more acreage of bananas being established on the ground. And so when I saw these figures that planting in 2019 was $2.7 million, and it had left bananas behind by almost $1.7 billion, I said, I saw it coming. I want us to look at that in the context of a crop that we can bounce back in after a wind event like hurricanes and so on, storms. If you look at the line with dashing, it is the most consistent crop in terms of maintaining an average of over $2 million a year. But what is even more important, if you look at 2017 when we had the hurricane, it was 2.1. But even in 2018, 1 year after the hurricane, it is just about $82,000 less for it to be back at $2 million again. So we see that by the second year after the hurricane, dashing still became a very important crop of $2.4 million to Dominica. And that is significant because after a hurricane, Dr. Thompson was talking about the recovery.
Yeah.
How quickly you recover. And one of the ways that farmers recovered was by the crop dashing. And yams, as you can see where it was, and our citrus is going down. I'm not too sure if that is because of the uptake of many juicers, which would be a good thing if it is the juicers that are taking the place of fresh oranges and grapefruits. being sold, that would be wonderful. But given my position as a man on the ground, I don't think that is the case. The amount of orange trees no longer exists, and so the export goes down. The volumes and the value. In 2011, the value of our total exports of our fresh produce was $41 million. That is what some years ago bananas would do when it is not doing too well. But our total exports is 41. In 2019, it is down to 14 million. And so, when we hear of the situations of people in the rural community, we must understand that the economy that they once had, their livelihoods have been significantly affected. And no other real economic activity that is sustainable have replaced their agricultural activity. And so it's no rocket science. We don't have to be people that go to university to understand that the situation that is facing people today in terms of the young Calypso, he said, everybody brooks. Everybody brooks. The figure speaks for themselves. And so we have to work on those things. Not as a party, not as a collective. We have to decide that this land that have, most of the other islands of the Caribbean have water deficit problem.
Yes.
Dominica is not in that category.
Yes.
And so it gives us an added advantage that if we organize our agriculture properly, we have enough water resources that we can build up irrigation systems. So what I was told about crop not being available because of certain conditions, weather conditions, it has to be something of the past, because we have the resource to put in the necessary intervention to mitigate against the effects of climate change, which is intense weather conditions. I saw the botanical gardens for the past few weeks prior to the recent hit. Everything was brown. Everything was brown. And so we have that advantage in the region. We are positioned in the middle of the island chains, and we have water as a plus to us that every crop needs that water. Every crop needs that water. Next slide, please. What are the marketing or the market potentials for us in Dominica in terms of the markets around us? I put Martinique, Barbados, and Trinidad because they are the islands with the largest population centers combined. Combine these three countries to give us a market of 2.2 as the estimated population. And we were talking about population and economic development. If you have a small market, you're going to sell. I remember a popular hotelier in Dominica said that if I was to go to Antigua, I probably would have 300 to 400 people, and I would sell hundreds of cartons of wine. In Dominica, because of the population and the economic activity, I probably would sell 4 boxes of wine. So population have that impact. What we have to begin to think is that agriculture, we must first produce food to feed ourselves and to satisfy the market. The islands, north of Dominica, when you add all of that, it is another 750,000. And so north of us, south of us, there are people who eat the things that we grow in Dominica. And our responsibility is to grow it in a way that is efficient in terms of cost efficiency, have increased yields so that we can sell at prices that are competitive in those markets. Santo Domingo, is supplying some of those markets. Our brothers in St. Lucia are living in St. Lucia and traveling all the way to Antigua and putting bananas in the market, a market that Dominica once dominated. I read a recent report of 2018 visit, and it is saying that even in Guadeloupe, where Haitians who came to Dominica have moved on, Haitians, they are now planting dashing in Guadeloupe. And so the volumes that used to go through there, it is saying that you have to do what it takes to keep your market. Your market is not yours permanently. A new kid come on the block, and they will sweep you off your feet. So you have to do what it takes. But on a larger scale, and I'm speaking from experience, the United States and the UK, non-banana crops have been shipped there. Mangoes have been shipped to the United Kingdom. Dashing have been shipped to the United Kingdom. Plantains have been shipped to the United Kingdom. And the Windward Island company that was responsible for doing the marketing of all the Windward Island, they changed their name into Windfresh, and one of their plans was to go into other crops. In my own thinking, they thought of that just too late. They were just so comfortable with the banana dollar, and they never saw the other opportunities. And that one crop syndrome is something that has been with us way back when. There was sugar cane, and then came the people didn't want the sugar cane anymore as an industry, and then they decided to go into cocoa and lime. And Dominica did very well in lime, but understand that they did not only sell lime as a fresh product. These British people who were in Dominica controlling these big estates, they understood that you cannot just sell fresh products. You can do added value, you can do production, conversion, and by that you can get a few more cents for that same lime. And so what they do, they crush the lime, they send so limes in barrel, they crush the limes, there was lime oil, and they ship that to Canada, the United Kingdom, and also the US. So today in 2024, when we have so many bright people in this country, you mean we haven't got people that can think, and we haven't got people with the capacity to add value to our products? And so these are the kind of things we have to start thinking. Next slide, please. And so, in terms of market, we do not have a debate. All the studies, the business gateway that was around somewhere in 2008, I read some market visits and report. I read another 2014 report. I read another 2018 report. And the last I read was one that was done in 2022 to Guadeloupe and Trinidad. And so, as far as having a market, it is there. But we have to do what it takes. We have to do what it takes to get to that market. And so, like it or not, people don't like it to talk about the banana industry. But the banana industry was the industry that showed us how we could grow a crop and compete in the international market and put a product from a small country where a product is produced not by one or two big estates, but a product was produced by thousands of small farmers on average farm holdings of 3 acres. And they could get these people, the food technologists from Tesco supermarket, to come down Dominica and see our systems and say, in the 4 Windward Islands, I'm going to make Dominica my choice supplier of bananas. It took organization. I often say the banana industry is like a movie. You see the final product, but you don't see the many times they said cut, take, cut, take, cut, take. But you just see a nice movie that looks so perfect in an hour and a half, 2 hours. There are things happening behind the scenes. And unless we have an institution that have that overarching responsibility to manage, and Mr. Vidal talk about it, unless we have an overarching institution to manage commercial production of agriculture and exports of agricultural produce. We will continue to answer people in the marketplace like me. In my job, I visited the supermarkets in Barbados several times, Trinidad. And I remember once we were trying to see if we got them to purchase some oranges from us. Because I saw right in the supermarket, they were actually, you could buy your oranges and juice it fresh in the supermarket, which was a new service they were offering. And the lady watched me in my face and she told me, Mr. Emmanuel, I hope you're not going to do me like they've done in the past. Free for shipments and then they cannot survive. Now, if you have an industry, a commercial approach to industry, you must know, firstly, what acreage you require to supply a domestic market, because we use all of those crops, and what acreage will deliver that to you. So what is our consumption value or amount in Dominica, number one, and number two, what is our export demand, and what acreage can deliver that export demand to us in a consistent, reliable basis. And unless we have that, we ain't going nowhere. With the banana industry, what we had was a system where we had what we call acreage determination. Now it has so much technology. You can just go and walk on a farm and download an app and walk in the four corners of the farm and it will tell you what the acreage is. We had to use an archaic system where we had so you remember the pogo? Dr. Barrow, you remember the pogo? When we had a piece of stick with a rope that was 33 and 1 foot feet. And we would put it and we would take the radius and count the number of plants within that and then do a calculation to do acreage determination. That's the hard work we did in that industry. And so we were able to know, because every quarter we did what was called acreage updates. And so every quarter we would update. If somebody have abandoned an acre, we know there's less. If somebody have added another acre, we would put it up. And so we could use the total acreage on the island. We had a formula that we used. And every October we had to give the exporting company a projection of volume divided by 13 weeks, every 4 weeks is a shipping period. And so we had to give them 13 shipping periods by 4 for the whole of the following year. So that they could know at the distribution channel of the market what we expect and how much we are going to contract to sell. And if there's a shortfall, we know that we can get another supplier to give us that shortfall. So our customer don't leave us and go somewhere else and get bananas. And that is how it must work. You must know what is in the ground, the type of crops, the acreages, and from that you can do your projection. People say, but dashing, you can't do projection of dashing. How you can't do projection of dashing? We started a project where we got a market. Just before I left, we got a market in the US. And we were able to get farmers to plant, but we scheduled the amount they planted. So you got that production schedule, planting scheduling. You know you need 10 acres to give you 2 containers. And you're doing that every month. So every month, you plant 10 acres. I don't know hard rocket science, but we have to have an overarching structure, company that can do that type of work. I guess there are much easier ways to make money. And so for that to be converted into a reality, all the market we talk about, these are the hard things we have to do. We have to be able to be producing planting materials. I heard you talking about tissue culture. I is nouveau in culture since 1992 in the banana industry. Establishment of agricultural team, there's labor shortages. There are small mechanical implements that people can use. A postal digger, I recall I did almost 80 holes in an hour with a postal digger. And so we can have, there are issues with labor. Our farmers are moving up in age. The average age of a farmer is climbing, and we're not replacing them at a rate. We're not replacing them at a rate through younger farmers coming through. And so there's going to be a deficit in terms of labor. And so we can work on that. We must have packaging and processing facilities. Gone are the days when you would just pick up something and just put it anyhow. People buy with their eyes. Okay, and so you must have presentation. That discipline will only come through the extension outreach, training the farmer, encouraging the farmer, monitoring the farmer from time to time. Research and development. You cannot have agriculture without research and development. Like I told you, these people who came from England, they had trials. We have to have that ongoing, or we have to take up that culture where we decide that agriculture is a science and you must know what is happening. I was talking to a young man, the awardee of the agricultural award last night, and he said that people have the misconception that once is a greenhouse, is a greenhouse, is a greenhouse. Because people have not appreciated, because of our temperatures in the island, that a greenhouse will not work for us as well as somewhere in the United States where the temperature is much cooler. So we have to understand those things. We call ourselves Nature Island. I've been hearing talk since a long time ago in Bethlehem. Branding. We call ourselves the Nature Island people. We do not have a brand for agricultural products. We do not have a brand for nothing. Nature. The French people, they refer to us as mon naturel. Dr. Thompson, that is how natural. They think of, because that is the impression they have of us already. That is already a big seller. But are we maximizing on that? Are we seeing what the traders or the hucksters, and let me just say we have to thank the people, we call it hucksters. I know you like that term. The traders, the fresh produce traders. They may have their limitations, but we have to give them a big thank you, because they are from Dominica to the other islands. Let's give them a hand. They deserve that. Again, we cannot grow agriculture without data capture. We must have data capture. Data capture is value. It's through going through data I was able to see, well, that is a crop that gives you a quick recovery after a storm. Although my own farm hurricane did 2007, hurricane did, when all my bananas were blown, blown. Before I got my insurance money from wind crop, I still had my workers working, because every first day we could harvest a 5 bags of dashing. 5 bags of dashing until I get my money to do what I have to do. So a software system that has multiple functionalities. And again, I don't know what is happening to us. If people like to defend turf in this country, DAPEX and Windfresh, the Banana XP, Windward Island Exporting Company, we jointly own the software called the Grower Outreach Management System. We owned it. At the time, DAPEX was going through difficulties, so we didn't have money to install hardware and so on and so on. And we offered it to state actors, I don't want to say state actors. We offered it to them. This thing could be purchasing of crops. It would give every farmer a unique certified number for your farm. And that is for traceability. Every box would have to have the farmer code on it. Something go bad, you know exactly where that box of produce came. It produced that. It had a functionalities to do with certification. It had functionalities to do with pest and disease, data collection and that. In fact, a coffee cooperative from one of the islands in the countries in Latin America actually wanted to buy that software when they heard about it. So we have to have these things in place. You need to know when the crop was established, you need to know the acreage, you need to be able to project the harvesting period so that you can inform your market what it is that you have. We spoke about determination of local and export demand and targeting of high value crops. Let me tell you, everything brings an enlightenment. When we were doing bananas alone, if we sent a 40-foot container of bananas with 1,000 boxes to Barbados, and let's say they paid us $27 a box, that would be $27,000. We have the same cost for the 40-foot container. When DAPEX no longer was exporting bananas to the UK market, we diversified the company into a broad-based agricultural export company. And we began the effort of developing tech packs of different product types and so on. And a pallet, sometimes 2 pallets of ginger to Barbados is almost the price of 10 pallets of bananas. So mixed crop exporting of high value crops and mixed with high value crops is the way we have to go. We have to identify the high value crops. Apricot we sold over 21 different crops to that region and 21 different crops. Apricot people think was only thing we 18 and people say, oh, I not eating apricot because it will grind me. Apricot today. Okay. Apricot today is the cosmetic industry is using apricots. The culinary people, they cooking, they're using apricot. So a lot of things we took for granted. There's an evolution taking place in fresh produce. The value of it, the health benefits. And so we need to really realize that in Dominica we still have an opportunity. But we must have the organization. And to tell you the truth, to organize 7,000 farmers to do one thing the same way, it's not an easy work. But is it achievable? Can it be done? Certainly, yes. We have done it in the past, and we can do it again. I think my time is up.
Excellent. But we are really running short of time. I hope you're taking your notes. Do you have it ready? Is he ready? Dave, you have him on? Okay. We are running the half of the problem with time. Okay, what we'll do, we'll take the break now, and then when we come back, we'll take a tea break. We'll take a tea break right now, and when we come back, we will continue with Dr. Lloyd. All right, that's fine? So let's do that. Okay, thank you.
Once again, we are live at the Jungle Bay Resort and Spa for the first day of the Dominica Economic Revival Summit organized by the United Workers' Party and the Electoral Reform Coalition. So far, you've heard from Dr. Thompson Fountain giving an overview of the economic state of Dominica. And then you also heard from Mr. Errol Manuel, who spoke on marketing. We're taking a short break and we will be right back for Dr. Lloyd speaking on agriculture. Thank you for joining. We will be right back.